Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're decoding something massive, a global system that sits right on our dinner tables, yet its true scale, well, it's kind of hidden in plain sight. We're talking about the meat, poultry, and dairy industry. But we're not just looking at the food itself. We're going to look at exactly how the food industry measures its hidden footprint. Like, how do these massive agricultural corporations actually track the immense ecological and biological resources required to produce our food? It's this absolutely fascinating world of unseen accounting. And honestly, understanding it gives us a completely new perspective on our entire global food system.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the hidden cost of food. Then, measuring the industry standard. Third, managing land and waste. After that, the antibiotic health challenge. And finally, the future of food.
All right, starting with section 1, the hidden cost of food.
I want you to think about this for a second. What's the hidden cost of the food currently sitting on your plate? When you pick up a carton of milk, maybe a dozen eggs, or a pack of chicken breasts from the supermarket, you just see the retail price, right? But behind that price tag is a massively complex operation. To put in perspective, it can take over 600 gallons of water just to produce a single burger. That's huge. We're talking about land use, water consumption, energy, and biological management on a strictly industrial scale. This industry is incredibly resource-intensive, and it generates significant impacts on the environment around it. So, if these costs aren't printed on your supermarket receipt, how exactly are they accounted for?
Which brings us to section 2, measuring the industry standard.
Well, the answer lies in something called the SASB standards. Think of these standards kind of like a highly detailed nutritional label, but instead of tracking calories and carbs, they track a corporation's hidden environmental and biological footprint. SASB stands for Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. Basically, these are specific, highly detailed accounting standards used by corporations to identify and report on industry-specific sustainability risks and opportunities. For the meat, poultry, and dairy industry, these standards dictate exactly how a company must measure and disclose its unseen impacts. Everything from the greenhouse gases emitted by livestock to the water used in processing plants. It literally takes the invisible impacts of agriculture and turns them into hard, quantifiable data that investors and regulators can actually track.
And what's brilliant is the integration of SASB into the global financial system. Specifically, it's now part of the IFRS Foundation, which sets standard accounting rules globally. This makes it the definitive diagnostic tool for the financial world. You see, this isn't just some voluntary field-out checklist. No way. By mandating these disclosures, it ensures that companies are reporting their ecological and biological footprint with the exact same rigor as their financial profits. It's a system purpose-built to measure the risks that could reasonably affect a company's cash flows over the long term.
Moving on to section 3, managing land and waste. So one of the most visceral and, frankly, massive challenges in this industry is waste. Under the specific SASB metric 160A1, companies have to disclose their waste, specifically the absolute amount of animal litter and manure generated at their facilities, and they report this in metric tons. Now, we are talking about millions upon millions of tons. To picture that, it's enough to fill dozens of massive sports stadiums every single year. The sheer scale of this concentrated waste is absolutely staggering. If it's not managed properly, it can lead to severe contamination of the air, the land, and our vital groundwater resources. But how you measure and manage this impact really depends on how the animals are raised. The standards actually require companies to differentiate their reporting. On one hand, you've got confined animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. These are highly dense, resource-heavy facilities that produce massive amounts of concentrated waste and pollutants in a really limited space. On the other hand, you have rangeland and pasture, naturalized grazing lands. While they're less dense, these vast tracts of land still face a big risk of physical degradation if they're overgrazed. Both systems have profound ecological footprints, and both require careful, completely distinct conservation metrics to make sure the land isn't destroyed in the process of feeding us. To combat this massive waste problem, especially in confined operations, it's just not enough to simply count the tons of manure. The SASB standard actually requires companies to track the exact percentage of that waste that is managed according to a strict nutrient management plan. And this isn't just a casual guideline. A proper plan has to include documented practices for handling manure and wastewater, specific land treatment practices, really rigorous soil and risk assessment analyses, and of course, meticulous record keeping. It's a highly engineered approach to ensure that this massive byproduct is collected, treated, and used agronomically. Basically, that means safely repurposed as crop fertilizer rather than becoming a toxic liability that leads to massive regulatory fines or an environmental disaster.
Let's pivot now to Section 4, the Antibiotic Health Challenge. Okay, so we've seen how industrial farming impacts the earth and the local ecology. But now we need to ask another critical question. How are these massive operations impacting our biology, and specifically public health? This brings us to one of the most high-stakes, absolutely crucial topics in the entire food system. The SASB standard document states this very clearly. It says, prevalent use of antibiotics that are also administered to humans may promote the development of antibiotic-resistant strains of bacteria. While putting antibiotics in animal feed or water can improve production output and help manage disease in those really dense industrial settings, there is a widely recognized public health risk here. The widespread use of these drugs in agriculture can directly contribute to the rise of superbugs, bacteria that no longer respond to the medicines we literally rely on to save human lives. It's an incredibly delicate balance between animal welfare, production efficiency, and global health. Because of this risk, the accounting standards force companies to get very, very specific. They must track the use of what are called medically important antibiotics. These are antimicrobial drugs that are officially included in the World Health Organization's medically important antimicrobials list. Simply put, these are the life-saving medicines used in human medicine. When these exact same drugs are administered to livestock, the risk of cross-resistance goes up, meaning a bug that survives in a farm animal might suddenly become completely untreatable in a human. Now, what's really interesting here is how granular this reporting gets. Under metric 260A.1, a meat or poultry producer can't just release a vague statement about reducing antibiotics. No, they must transparently report the exact percentage of their animal production, measured by carcass weight, that received medically important antibiotics versus those that received not medically important antibiotics. And it's all broken down by animal type. If a chicken received a medically important antibiotic at any stage of its life, that weight has to be tallied up and reported to investors. It forces absolute transparency on a previously hidden biological risk. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the future of food. Let's see how this all builds into a really comprehensive accountability system. On one side, you have metric 160A.1, meticulously tracking metric tons of waste to protect our groundwater and soil. On the other side, metric 260A.1 tracks the exact weight of animals treated with human-grade antibiotics to protect public health from resistant bacteria. Together, these metrics represent a powerful dual approach. They're measuring both the health of the earth and the health of the public. They basically force the industry to internalize costs that for a really long time were completely externalized and invisible. So the crucial point here really comes down to that old, reliable adage. You can't manage what you don't measure. For decades, the true ecological and biological costs of industrial animal production were just really hard to pin down. But by creating objective, standardized measurements through tools like the SASB standards, we transform vague environmental concerns into hard, actionable data. Whether it's tracking millions of tons of manure or the precise percentage of antibiotic usage, putting a real number on these practices is the absolute first necessary step toward managing these massive systemic risks. Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. How does knowing these hidden metrics change the way you view the meat, poultry, and dairy industry? The next time you walk down the grocery aisle, you aren't just looking at food anymore. You're looking at the end result of millions of tons of managed land, meticulously tracked water use, and carefully calculated biological decisions. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the hidden ruler of our food systems. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time on The Explainer.